A lot of things has already been said about majestic city of Moscow. 1,000 years of history and countless fates, love and hate, prosperity and poverty. The city, for this day, unites hundreds of different nations and cultures. It embraces most modern technologies, but also all major world religions and traditions. What is lesser known, however, is that the city of Moscow, or Moskva, shares its names with one very mighty film camera. In my hand there is Moscow-5, most technologically advanced and mass-produced camera of that lineup. It was manufactured in big quantities from 1956 to 1950. At these times, the number of people who were semi-professionally or professionally engaged with photography grew up significantly. Soviet market was in desperate need for camera which could shoot large negatives with great quality. This was the answer. 6x9 frame size, folding design which supposed to make it portable, and relatively simple but okayish 105mm f3.5 lens. It seemed that success was guaranteed. The Moscow-5 fate, however, resembling a long history of an eponymous city, took a rather curved path. Long story short, most of actual professionals of that time already used capitalist imported cameras for a number of reasons. They were always more reliable, customizable and mechanically advanced. But eventually, Moscow-5 found its place in the market. It was widely used at Soviet beaches, where locals earned some extra money by photographing tourists. Cameras for this application still need to offer great image quality, while not being so rare and expensive as capitalist stuff. Also, some very apparent downsides of the design of this camera, which we are definitely going to talk about a bit later, were of less importance for beach photographers rather than, for example, for journalists. So my copy was made in 1960, and now it's a great time of the year to fully show this camera's strengths and weaknesses. My goal for this video is to achieve the very best quality which is possible for a film camera like that. That's why I will be using Ilford Pan F, extremely slow, grainless and sharp film. Also, I will be exposing it as ISO 35 just to give that extra boost for the shadows. And of course, our subject today is the city of Moscow. There are a lot of songs written about Moscow. One can remember Lyrical and Sentimental Moscow Nights, which is famous in the whole world, especially in jazz, or Walking the Streets of Moscow, bright and lively tune full of hopes and love for the whole world. While using this camera, however, a song of a different kind comes to mind.
Я по свету немало хаживал, жил в землянках, в окопах в тайге. Похоронен был дважды заживо, зная разлуку, любил в тоске. Но Москвой я привык гордиться, и везде повторял я слова. Дорогая моя столица, золотая моя Москва.
So we are in the center of Moscow, and believe it or not, it's actually quite difficult to find any good composition here because there's a lot of people. The day is very good, the weather is great, and all of them just went out to the streets. We are now right in the middle of a park which is called Zaryadia, which was built, I think, roughly in 2017 or 2018. So it's quite new. And first shot I want is money shot. A lot of tourist attraction, Kremlin. There are actually some convenient things about this camera. For example, here on the aperture ring there is a red dot which is situated between f11 and f16, which shows best possible aperture for best resolution for this camera. So we'll be shooting approximately here, which is I think f13, and see what results we'll get. My light meter says that at f13 we should rate it as 1/25th of a second, so this is our first shot. Let's try. I actually quite like the first one. No real composition megamind stuff, just plain simple panorama, but it captures the mood of the day. I should give props to Ilford Pan F. I had no problem in extracting shadow details out. Sky is clearly overexposed. I burned it down in Photoshop, that's why the grain is very visible. It wasn't on a raw scan. I rated the film a bit slower. It was a conscious decision, so no complaints here. In terms of sharpness, clearly the edges aren't sharpest ever, but center and midframe are exceptionally sharp and can be enlarged, I think, more than my Canon files, but a bit less than Sony A7 IIIR files, which I also have. Our second subject of the frame is skyscraper on Taganskaya Nabережная, which is one of the seven skyscrapers which were built in Stalin's times. And actually I decided that for this shot we don't really need a tripod because it is very sunny here, so our exposure will be, if we are following sunny 16 rule, will roughly be 1/50th of a second anyway. So let's shoot. I think I panicked and messed up, too shaky. Eventually, I decided to use a tripod. I think I messed up the previous shot because it was too shaky. I kind of panicked, so I decided to use my tripod anyway, and we'll make the same shot just second time and using auto timer, which is actually built in that camera. Even though it is not recommended, I'm using auto timer here, and its mechanism is very interesting. Firstly, you cock the shutter, then you press a button on the barrel of the lens, and then you cock the shutter further. And only then it starts to work properly. Actually, I've heard that auto timer on this specific camera is very unreliable and actually can break the camera. But I don't have a remote cable with me today. I ordered it, but it's still in transit, and all my old cables broke sadly, so today, and only today, I will be using it to minimize shake. After 5 minutes, skies eventually cleared. Second one shows similar behavior, and I'm also noticing that left corners are significantly softer than right corners. Don't know why that happens. The lens is probably very slightly misaligned, either in centering or it is slightly tilted to the right in relation to focal plane. The composition is also nothing to be extremely proud of, but it's okay. I must admit, I very admire looking at crops of 6:9. There is something magical here, the textures and stuff. The water, for example, is absolutely amazing at its own. Sadly, while I was filming and trying to speak which is left from my English, I felt legendary levels of cringe, so from now on I will be speaking Russian and dubbing it in post. So let me introduce you to more intricate details of Russian history. We are near Krasnoprestynskaya metro station, and its ground lobby was designed by Karo Alabyan. He was okay as an architect, this station is his most famous work, and also he designed one of the buildings of my university, my alma mater, which I loved to this day. But in the history of architecture and arts he is much more famous not as an architect, but as a party functionary. He was the head of Secretary of Union of Architects of the USSR. During most repressive Stalin times, he bullied quite a bunch of people, including the most famous architects of all time like Shushev. People really do not like him now, he is considered a villain in art history. From the other side, we have a new apartment complex, which looks rather villainous too. It was built like 7 years ago, right at the place of demolished cinema theater, which was called Nightingale. Moscow-5 really liked it. It was a sort of monument of modern architecture of 80s and 90s. And somehow it was demolished in violation of all laws and public opinion for no reason at all. So they built this abomination, and here we have a story of two tragic events in the history of Russian architecture. Here I found some composition, and now I'll be shooting without a tripod, because I left it at work, and also it is interesting how the camera will handle at such low speeds handheld. It is sunny, though there are some clouds here. I hope something will come out of this. Here is this one. I think it has a small amount of jitter at 1/80th of a second. Also, I decided here not to focus on infinity, but closer to 10 or 15 meter, so closer to columns on the left, and indeed they are sharper. Here I probably would prefer a cropped, more abstract shot, something like this. It actually takes some time to learn 105mm coverage, as it's closer to 40mm at full frame, not your usual 50mm. The difference actually is very apparent. For me, Moscow is not only about famous tourist attractions like Kremlin, the Tower of Ivan the Terrible, Taganskaya skyscraper and so on, but also about forests and parks. That's because during 20s and 30s, when the Soviet Union started to develop urban projects and the whole country dived deep into city engineering, Moscow was redesigned, and despite all bad stuff, they actually were thinking about working people during that times. So the decision was made to leave a lot of parks and even forest areas in Moscow, so that an ordinary walker could take a walk near home after work or on weekends and enjoy nature. Now we are in reservation, which is called Elk Island. It is situated within the city diameter, and still to this day you can find some moose here. I must admit, I very rarely visited this place, and it turns out there are some huge pedestrian highways here. We still yet to find a good composition, but the sun now is too high, and in deep forest it's already too dark, so we wait, we still have enough time. A convenient thing about these folding cameras is ability to roughly frame the shot while not even extracting lens and bellows, so it is very possible to just walk and search for good frames without too much hassle. There are basically two real struggles with this camera, rangefinder and viewfinder, and yes, they are not coupled. I don't want to admit this, but this is the smallest and darkest hole I peeped through in my entire life. Period. Also, there is no good hand grip, you always will be covering rangefinder with your finger. Viewfinder on the opposite is nice, big and bright, and approximately half of it is blocked by a rangefinder. I'm not even fully exaggerating. So, it is very difficult to focus and frame with that thing. Good thing is, you don't need to worry about framing too much, as it eats so much film, so you can just crop everything you don't like. As we were entering deeper areas, something became very obvious. It is sadly already too dark for this film. Slowest exposure of this shutter is 1 second. For more, you need a release cable, which I don't own for now, because I broke all of them, they are fragile indeed. So I think no more shots for today, we'll wait for a release cable. At least we have a good time with nature. By the way, I wanted to share another one funny thing about this camera. You can mount it on a tripod not only using main screw, but also on the very front. Why? Because this way would be a portrait orientation. We open this little thing using our fingernail, then extract the lens and place it on a flat surface. That's how portrait orientation is achieved. Such a convenience, no words to say. One day later, I think I managed to find something. That is the small wooden bridge in the middle of nowhere. We're not really in Moscow, but we are very near. I've already prepared my shot, it's quite a bit brighter here, as the sun still shines. I'll be shooting at f11 and my shutter speed will be half of a second.
Ах ты, сука!
Oh no, what a disaster! Something went wrong. Just now my shutter button stopped working. That is the bad news. Good news is that this camera has two shutter buttons. Its producer knew that there will be troubles with the first one, which is situated on the body of the camera, and decided to add a second one, which is situated on the barrel of the lens. And it looks like auto timer is the trouble, because I've never experienced any of that with this camera. The scene is actually quite contrasty, there is some sunlight and deep shadows also, so let's see how the film will handle that. This is very chaotic because of the lighting and ton of foliage. The film surprisingly handled dynamic range quite well. I like it. It is also simple, probably not very powerful, but quite pleasing to my eye. Moscow is not polar, it's diverse. Tourist attractions, historical buildings, nature, but also everything which was built in the 20th century. Soviet heritage from 20s to 90s makes up the biggest part of city's development. We are now near Timirazev's academic complex, which is the most important agricultural university of Russia. Here are a few avant-garde buildings, but also in the style of Stalin's neoclassicism and everything in between. I decided to choose this theme. Not the building you'll notice at first glance, but very lovely at closer look. Also very nice lighting and color, maybe a tad difficult for that film. Ideally, you need a color film for those kind of scene, which we don't have today. Well, whatever happens. If I'd taken the photo now, I definitely would have positioned the camera significantly lower to accentuate those lines of road which are leading our eye to an arch. Again, here I found crops to be much more interesting than the whole shot, and thanks to 6:9 and slow speed film, I definitely can pull this off. Look at this blooming tree, the tonality is awesome. These scratches and marks are also to my liking. The arch itself, I pretty like. Daylight hours slowly but surely come to an end, and we are coming to another place of tourist attractions. These are Vorobyovy Gory or Sparrow Hills, which is one of the biggest heights in Moscow. It is the right bank of the Moscow River. A lot of historical events happened here as well. A lot was built, but to this day the main building here is famous Moscow State University. It is another one of 7 Stalin's skyscrapers, informally known as 7 Sisters. This one is probably the most famous of all of them and most pompous one, but we are not going to shoot it today. I know that I'm always rambling about this, but it is very difficult to find a good composition in these popular places, despite the fact that the panoramic view is amazing. Sadly, trees are covering the view significantly. It is difficult, very difficult. We'll continue to explore this place. By the way, MCU building wasn't meant for MCU at first. They just decided to build a cool building here because the place looked awesome, and then chose its purpose later as an afterthought. They thought of making it into hotel or even residential building, but happily now this serves much better purpose as the main building of Moscow State University. They used to have some problems with space in the 50s, so a new quarter of buildings came very handy. I think I found something, and the light is gone enough for my liking. One problem is, however, Moscow-5 uses a big screw, 3/8 of an inch one. My tripod is very expensive and very beautiful, full carbon fiber, extremely stable. It was meant for $15,000 360-degree cameras, and I got it accidentally. But without a head, it's too short. Nevertheless, I found some space between handrail where it's possible to stick a camera in. Also, the release cable has suddenly spawned right on my camera. Well, I just finally picked it up from the delivery service. At f13 we'll be exposing for 12 seconds, no reciprocity compensation, as I'll overexposing it a bit anyway. I'll probably give it a couple of extra seconds, we'll see. I also really want this bright light at the right side of the frame now to be out of the frame. It is very distracting and can also ruin my contrast. Industar 23 has coatings, but this lens was made in 58, so it's better to be on the safer side. Let's try. Here, film, in my opinion, handled the situation much better than digital. Yes, blacks are completely crushed and foreground cannot be seen, but it wasn't pretty anyway. Actually, it was quite ugly. The tonality of the stadium is also, in my opinion, greater here. Now I had an artifact there, some kind of light leak in the left upper corner of the frame. I tried to cover it in Photoshop and you can still see that some manipulation was done here, but if we look at the whole picture, it is okay. Judging by nature of it, it was made not in camera, but as a result of poor handling later. Also, I must point out that at close-ups we see some defined coma at edges here. In the end, who is this camera for? It is obviously a match for very slow-paced photographers who think a lot about each shot, thanks to its very capable lens and large negative size. The only sin of this lens is coma at its corners, which can easily be cropped. I didn't mention it here, but color rendering of this lens is very good to my liking, even awesome, and contrary to most of vintage lenses, it doesn't bloom or veil. It is very capable of extracting more than 50 working megapixels out of shot with the low-grain film. There are some things you should take care of. As with all old rangefinders, it is forbidden to change shutter speeds after the shutter was cocked. Also, don't try to use auto timer with this lens, especially on fast exposures. They even write it in the manual that at 1/25th of a second using auto timer will actually break the camera. Otherwise, camera is actually quite handy. I use it occasionally already for 7 years, and even in extreme conditions, in the mountains and in the wetness and rains of Urals, I experienced no mechanical problems. Just don't touch the auto timer. Its main problems are horrible dark rangefinder and minimal focus distance of 1.5 meters, so no close-ups and large portraits. If you can live without it, it is the cheapest way to get into serious 6x9 photography. So not for all, but very capable and fascinating, just as its counterpart, the city of Moscow. If you still have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments, and I bid you farewell.